You know what? We have more great interviews and more great guests coming up with our next guest now. I'm excited about this one.
Absolutely. We've got Bryce Williford joining us from BlueGrace Logistics. Bryce, thank you for coming on the show today. We're talking a little bit about upcoming bid process and how you can really manage that in this changing environment. So let's dig right into it.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me, Anthony. I thought it was great. It's a tough crowd, so now I know what to be prepared for here. So we're coming into Q3, doing a lot of bids now, entering what is traditionally your second half of the year bid season for a lot of clients. Everybody is taking a look at how long can they lock in lower rates. How do we balance the needs for service and capacity? If you think about rate, service, and capacity, kind of on a 3 points of a triangle. They all work together, right? The lower your rates, sometimes the lower your service. The higher the service, the higher the rates, and your ability to secure capacity is dependent on that as well. So we're seeing a lot of our clients today, take maybe slightly different approaches to the RFP process than they have in the past. Shorter procurement cycles. So if companies used to do RFPs annually, they're doing them every 6 months. If they used to do them every 6 months, we're seeing them done on a quarterly basis, really to stay more in tune with the market. Shippers are seeing that rates have softened pretty substantially in the last 6 months. And so, on the one hand, you want to try to lock in some of that better pricing, the improved pricing, but at the same time, you don't want to miss the bottom. So, we're seeing that from a trend. We're also seeing more diversity from a supplier standpoint. So, caps on how much volume can be awarded to one provider, a mix of brokerage and asset providers, as well as looking at more alternative solutions, new types of pricing, things like that.
Bryce, it seems like that almost every year there's a host of trends that are really kind of being addressed by shippers during this time of the year. What are going to be some of the biggest issues that shippers are going to be looking at throughout this time frame?
Sure. So still very uncertain, right? We've seen a pretty substantial easing from where capacity was over the last 18 months. It was challenging to get and secure trucks and have good route guide performance. We're seeing that improve now. Obviously, you can see that from some of the data that FreightWave shares, right? That route guides have improved and tender rejections are low, but order volumes are still relatively high compared to years prior to the pandemic. And so a lot of shippers are uncertain around what's going to happen next. Will we have a firmer peak season again? Will we see capacity increase? Will we have a challenging hurricane season, right? That's coming up. And that always, creates potential disruptions within the supply chain and within capacity. So, right now what we're seeing is, shippers are looking mostly for consistent capacity that they can count on, as well as, the ability to, recognize some of these lower rates that are going on in the market right now. One trend that we're definitely seeing is there's less waterfall within route guides today that for bids that are going on. You're either primary or freight's going to the spot board. I'm sure that will change as capacity tightens again at some point in our ever cyclical market. But right now, we're definitely seeing that.
So right now, if you're a shipper and maybe you haven't quite gotten into the trend of signing shorter term bids or signing these mini bids or getting into the shorter bid cycle that we've been seeing kind of be pretty popular throughout the last 2 years, you can be sitting there kicking yourself if you signed a year-long contract in January and you're like, God, we're 3 quarters in and I'm still just struggling in this tight economy. What type of lessons do you think that some shippers who maybe are sitting in that still longer bid cycle and almost not refusing, but are very hesitant to transition to that shorter bid cycle, what type of lessons are they learning as we watch this economy take a slight downturn and watch the freight markets get tighter?
Any shipper that hasn't gone to their providers and asked for rate reductions or isn't sort of maybe off the books doing that collaboratively with their primary providers are certainly looking at, we're gonna do another bid cycle at some point. We've held these higher rates that we locked in when, last year or early in 2022. We're going to expect that there's some consistency in your tender acceptance moving forward when we do a new bid and the market changes again as we get into 2023. That's kind of the messaging we're hearing from our customers that are keeping their rates in place, but mostly it's about collaboration, right? If shippers are, whether it's because they're holding rates right now, or they're looking to their primary incumbent carriers to provide high levels of service, it's very collaborative and looking at how can we ensure that we keep high levels of service, that we don't go back to what we had last year, where we were seeing 35-40% tender rejections in the reefer world, and high teens, low 20s in the dry van space. Nobody wants to go back to that from a shipper standpoint, and a lot of shippers that did lock in those higher rates did so knowing that if the market does change and does go down, we're going to have these rates in place, and we're paying for that higher level of service. They want to make sure they maintain that.
And Bryce, after we look at what's happened over the last couple of years, what are going to be some of the changes that you see that are really going to be something that's going to be expected moving forward? It's not just going to be a trend, but this is now just a way of life.
Yeah, again, high route guide or high tender acceptance, I think, is something that's always a primary scorecard metric that's going to be looked at even more so today after what we saw in the last 18 to 24 months. I do think you're going to see a continued push into more diverse suppliers from a equipment type, asset versus brokerage, or geographic standpoint. Maybe caps on awards that are being provided to certain providers. I also think that you're going to see more opportunity for providers that can do different types of services that align with a shipper's needs. Drop trailer capacity, right, or dedicated or round trip shipments, depending on the needs of the shipper. Multi-stop shipments as they look to be more efficient and use more space more efficiently on their trucks. Providers that can do those things, I think, are going to have a leg up in the market going forward, and I think that's something that's here to stay.
So a lot of shippers have kind of changed their strategy throughout the last 2 years to account for just the extremeness, I guess I would say, of the way things are doing, from port congestion to rates to rail congestion to truckload capacity, et cetera. And some of them were prone to overcorrection, maybe doing a little bit too much. And now that we're coming out on the other side, coming back to this normalization state, they're realizing, like, holy cow, we made too much of a correction. What type of lessons do you think were learned over the last 2 years? And is there a chance of those shippers maybe making another overcorrection when trying to get back to those normalization levels, like a true pendulum swing instead of just trying to find that middle ground?
Well, it's definitely a pendulum, and we see that with suppliers as well, with capacity, whether it's with our carrier partners or in our approach. We'll overshoot, undershoot, try to correct and get back to whatever is optimal. I think that it further reinforces the need to have strong partners. It further reinforces the need to understand the business that your shipper, if you're a broker or a carrier, what they're providing. And then, on the flip side, I think it speaks to the need for that shipper to truly understand the capacity and the services that their suppliers can offer. We will participate in a lot of RFPs, really without much beyond the bid deck and maybe an intro call and something like that. And I always push my team to try to do more, to try to have whether it's a discovery call in advance or a meeting to try to understand the shipper supply chain, where they're coming from, why they're doing that procurement event at that time. Is this just their annual bid and they've changed nothing over the last 3 years? Or is this new? Are they doing this at a different time? Is there some seasonality to their business or something that's changed? And I think the more collaborative you can be, the better you can understand sort of your shipper's capacity strategy and then the execution strategy that goes with that, right? How do you find and procure your equipment, and then how do you actually process your route guide, tender your freight, deal with the exceptions that come up? Everybody's going to be better there. And then ultimately build those partnerships and start looking at, if you look at the available shipments you have as a shipper, as 100% as the full pie, can you start taking pieces of that and aligning it with partners that are actually going to stay with you through, sort of through ups and downs in the market?
Bryce, these are all great points and very insightful. Thank you so much for joining us this morning.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Great stuff always coming out of BlueGrace, and we will talk to them again next month. Right now, we're going to take another quick break. We'll be back with a carrier update, and we'll talk to Ken Sherman from IntelliTrans about what's going on in the upstream manufacturing world, Anthony's favorite topic to talk about. We'll be right back.